The only known Nintendo PlayStation console in existence is changing hands. Bidding for the legendary prototype concluded recently when someone placed a $300,000 bid. With the buyer's premium, the person who won the auction will pay $360,000 to own a piece of gaming history. As with any high-profile auction, the device was expected to attract big bids. And for a time, it did. At one point in the bidding process, even Oculus founder Palmer Luckey took part. However, it's probably fair to say that its outgoing owners were hoping for a better outcome, even if the auction set the record for the most expensive piece of gaming memorabilia ever sold. It's believed the device represents Sony's first attempt at creating its own gaming hardware. It adds a built-in CD-ROM to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Had Sony and Nintendo continued their partnership, the console would have allowed the SNES to play CD games. After a falling out with Nintendo, however, Sony went on to release the original Sony PlayStation. And the rest, as they say, is history. In fact, without this collaboration and disagreement, the VR landscape of today could look much, much different. SpaceX successfully launched its Falcon 9 rocket on the company's 20th cargo mission recently to the International Space Station, sending more than 4,500 pounds of supplies and science experiments to the 3 crew members living in orbit. Following takeoff, SpaceX then landed its Falcon 9 on a landing pad in Florida. That was the 50th overall rocket landing for the company. I remember when I first saw it, and still every time I see it, it looks like 1950s sci-fi. While it was a fairly routine launch for the company, it was also a significant one. The final resupply mission for NASA under SpaceX's original contract with the space agency. That doesn't mean SpaceX will be done launching supplies to the ISS, though. In 2016, NASA awarded SpaceX a second contract to continue launching cargo missions to the station throughout 2024. And once this new round of launches begins, SpaceX's hardware will get an upgrade too. The company has long used its Dragon 1 cargo capsule to carry all the supplies to the ISS, but now SpaceX will begin using its new Dragon 2 capsule. This new Dragon capsule is very similar to the one that SpaceX will use to send people to the space station later this year. It's slightly bigger than its predecessor, able to carry about 20% more volume, and it can be reused up to 5 times in space. Each Dragon 1 spacecraft could only be used up to 3 times. Plus, it sports quite a few upgrades, including an entirely new parachute system. We learned a lot on the Dragon 1 spacecraft. That comes from the Vice President of Build and Flight Reliability at SpaceX. We put all the lessons learned basically in Dragon 2 as much as we could. Perhaps the biggest new feature of Dragon 2 is that it will be able to dock all on its own with the International Space Station. All of the previous Dragon cargo capsules had to have some help to get to the ISS. Each vehicle approached the station and an astronaut on board had to kind of capture the capsule with a robotic arm. The arm would then bring the Dragon closer to the ISS and attach it into a docking port. But from now on, both crew and cargo versions of the Dragon will be able to approach the station and dock by themselves, freeing up time for the astronauts on board the ISS. SpaceX is expected to fly this new Dragon capsule sometime in the fall. In the meantime, the final Dragon 1 launched last week, orbited Earth for a while, and met up with the International Space Station this morning. It's bringing various supplies and experiments, including a system to study organs on microchips. Dragon is also bringing a new European platform that will be attached on the outside of the ISS, allowing research institutions and companies to attach their own payloads on the exterior of the station. This Dragon will stay attached to the ISS for about a month before returning to Earth. When it leaves, it'll be loaded with up to 4,000 pounds of cargo to be returned to the ground. After the vehicle splashes down in the ocean, the era of Dragon 1 will be over. SpaceX says Dragon 1 had a great career and we're really proud at how it contributed to the important science aboard the ISS. In fact, SpaceX's Dragon made history in 2012 by becoming the first private vehicle to attach to the ISS ever. To date, teaching a robot to perform a task has usually involved either direct coding, trial and error testing, or hand-holding the machine. Soon, though, you might just have to perform the task like you would any other day. MIT scientists have developed a system planning with uncertain specifications, otherwise known as puns, that helps bots learn complicated tasks when they otherwise stumble, such as setting a dinner table. Instead of the usual method where the robot receives rewards for performing the right actions, puns has the bot hold beliefs over a variety of specifications and use a language they call linear temporal logic that lets it reason about what it has to do right now and in the future. To nudge the robot towards the right outcome, the team set criteria that helps the robot satisfy its overall beliefs. The criteria can satisfy the formulas with the highest probability, the greatest number of formulas, or even those with the least chance of failure. A designer could optimize a robot for safety if it's working with hazardous materials, for instance, or consistent quality if it's a factory model. MIT's system is much more effective than traditional approaches in early testing. A puns-based robot only made 6 mistakes in 20,000 attempts at setting the table. Even when the researchers threw in complications like hiding a fork, the automation just finishes the rest of the task and came back to the fork when it popped up. In that way, it demonstrated a human-like ability to set a clear overall goal and improvise. The developers ultimately want the system to not only learn by watching, but to react to feedback. You could give a verbal correction or a critique of its performance, for instance. That will involve much more work, but it hints at a future where your household robots could adapt to new duties by watching you set an example. That is absolutely fascinating. And back up to space we go for lettuce in space. Lettuce, as it turns out, is just as nutritious when grown in space as it is when it's grown here on terra firma, suggesting that astronauts could one day produce their own food on the ISS. Goya Massa and her colleagues at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida analyzed 3 batches of lettuce grown on the ISS between 2014 and 2016. The researchers compared the space veg to lettuce grown here on Earth under similar environmental conditions, controlling the relative humidity, carbon dioxide concentration, and temperature. By culturing the bacteria found on the lettuce and using DNA sequencing, they found that there were more microorganisms on the lettuce batches from the ISS than on those that were grown here on Earth. Massa says this was expected. Astronauts have their own microflora, and there are just things that live in the environment of space. On the other hand, the levels of nutrients between both types of lettuce was very similar. We were a little surprised by these results, as we thought the nutrients levels in the plants may accumulate differently in flight, says Massa. The researchers chose the red romaine lettuce for the experiment because its seeds germinate reliably and the astronauts would actually want to eat it. Most people don't hate lettuce, she says. According to Massa, the astronauts think the lettuce is delicious, and they have tried it with tacos and cheeseburgers on the space station. The researchers have now sent other seeds to the ISS to be grown, including kale and cabbage. I think plants are going to be very important for the crew diet in the future, and if we ever want to be Earth independent, Massa says, Well, it's going to be a necessity. Cyprian Versu at the University of Bremen, Germany, says there are plenty of challenges that need to be met before plants provide a sustainable food source for astronauts, such as a lack of sunlight and the different gravity and radiation levels in space.